Lassen My Lad, a Swedish folktale told by Presson. Once on a time there was a high-born duke who did not want to stay home. So he left and traveled far and wide and spent lavishly with the great wealth that he had taken with him. And because of his wealth, he made many friends along the way, those who wanted to gain something from his extravagant wealth. And he spent lavishly and gave away many sums of money until finally he had ran out of all the money that he had. And unsurprisingly, when he ran out of money, his friends disappeared as well. So he had no choice but to wander home like a journeyman, working his way, trying to get to the place that had once been his home. Along the way one night he was in a forest and wondering where he was going to sleep when he saw an old bedraggled hut standing among some juniper bushes. And so he went in to the hut. There wasn't anything fancy in there, no chair or bed even, only an old chest. So the Duke wondered what was in this old chest. He opened it up, and there was another chest, and that one opened up to another chest, and so on, till they became small boxes. And he opened up a really tiny box, and it had a piece of paper. On that piece of paper was "Lassen My Lad," and he said those words, and suddenly he heard, "What does my master want?" He looked around, but he didn't see anything. So he read the piece of paper again. "Lassen My Lad, what does my master want?" came the reply again. He decided to test it. "If anyone is listening," he said, "I would like a meal." And suddenly appeared before him the finest meal he'd ever had. And so he ate until he was full, and then, having traveled all day, he was tired, and without a bed already in the little hut, he said again, "Lassen My Lad, what does my master want?" came the reply. Still no sign of who had said the words. "I would like a bed to sleep in for the night." And so appeared a bed in the hut. As he was getting ready to go to sleep, the Duke had another thought. "Lassen My Lad, what does my master want?" I am much more used to better rooms. I often sleep in castles. Can you make this room a better room, a grand room for me?" And so it became a grand room, and he went contentedly to sleep. The next morning he woke up, and he found that it wasn't just the room that had changed. In fact, he was in a beautiful castle with gardens and turrets. And as he toured the place, he only found one thing missing. There wasn't other people there. And so he said, "Lassen My Lad, what does my master want?" came the reply. "I would like servants to tend to my needs." And so, as the day started going, servants appeared, bowing and curtsying to him and providing for the Duke as he needed. Now, this land was owned by a king who lived in another grand castle on the other side of the forest. And that morning the king woke up and looked out his window to see the turrets of another castle yonder. He called his courtiers to him. "Do you see that castle over there?" he cried. And they did, and they were astounded. But the king declared, "Who dares build castle on my land? I order you to attack it." And so the king's soldiers went to attack the Duke's castle. And along the way they blew their trumpets and beat on their drums. And the Duke heard their coming and knew what it meant, being a high-born duke. And so he called on the mysterious person again. "Lassen my lad. What does my master want?" came the reply. "I need soldiers to defend my castle, many, so that there's no chance of defeat." And so a large army appeared before him. Now when the king's men arrived, they were shocked at the sight and knew without a doubt that they could not achieve victory. And so the duke invited them to join him in his castle and show them that he was all the splendor that he had. And as they talked in his castle, they quickly turned towards talk of the king, who he was, and the duke began to get a sense for who this man was. And he also heard about the king's daughter, a beautiful princess. But while the king's men did talk about her as possibly a good match for the duke, they said she was very haughty. That means she didn't look at a man. She had never shown interest. And so after they left to go back to the king, the duke called, "Lassen my lad, what does my master want?" "Bring me the king's daughter, but take care that you do not wake her up." And so appeared before him the king's daughter, asleep. And so he looked at her, and behold, she was as beautiful as has been told. And so he determined that he did want to marry her. He asked Lasse to send her back home, taking care again not to wake her up. The next morning when the king woke up, he saw still standing the castle that he had asked to be destroyed. This made him angry, and he started shouting at his courtiers until the captain of his soldiers explained to him what was going on. Just then, the princess came waltzing in to the king. "Oh, father," she said, "I had the wonderful dream last night. I went to that castle over across the forest, and the duke was a wonderful man. I think that I want to marry." And the king took off his crown, scratched his head, and wondered, "But you've never even looked at a man before. Why do you want to marry now?" And the princess said, "I don't know, but I do, and I want to marry the duke." Just then the duke arrived, sending a messenger that he was overjoyed to visit the king and wanted to have his company. So the king invited the duke in, and they discussed many things. And the king soon began to like the duke very much, and they held a feast. And the duke and the princess sat next to each other. The duke, with his silver tongue, very quickly had the princess falling all over him. And so the duke asked the king for his daughter's hand in marriage. The king, being a smart fellow, understood very well that it was much better to have the duke as a friend, or even better as a son-in-law, than as a potential enemy. And so he wanted to accept this arrangement, but he wanted to investigate first what was the duke's castle and what was going on there for his own eyes. And so first he went to investigate. Before they arrived, the duke set Lasse to work on many different things, making sure everything was perfect for when the king arrived. And so it was. The king and the princess toured the castle, the gardens, everything was beautiful, greater than anyone could have ever imagined. And so everyone was happy, and soon the duke and the princess were married to each other. It was a beautiful time, and everyone was so happy. But after some time, the duke got a little whisper in his ear. It was Lasse asking, "Is my master content now?" And the Duke said, "Yes, thank you very much. I am very content." But Lasse said, "But what do I get for it? I have done all this work, but I have nothing for it." The Duke thought, "Well, what can I give you? I don't have anything I could give you." And Lasse said, "Well, you could give me the scrap of paper that you have." And the Duke said, "Well, I know the words by heart by now, so sure, I can give you the paper." And so Lasse told him to put the piece of paper on his chair when he went to bed that night. And so he did. But in the middle of the night, he woke up freezing cold to find that he was in the hut again. The old bedraggled hut. No bed. All the gardens and the castle gone. Only the princess remained. So, in that moment, the Duke understood that by giving away the piece of paper, he had taken away his power over this creature. And so everything had disappeared that had been created for him. In distress, he told the princess exactly what had happened and begged her to leave him, but she did not want to. She had made her vows of marriage and she wanted to stick to them regardless of what happened. The king, however, when he saw that everything had disappeared that had been made, grew very suspicious and tried to question the Duke about what was going on. The Duke, in his distress, did not want to tell the king, so he kept his mouth shut, and the king became very angry with him, till finally he ordered that the Duke would be hanged for what had happened. So a gallows was built, and the Duke was taken to be hanged. But the princess, still very much in love with the Duke, despite not having the possessions, bribed the executioner to fix it so that it would only look like the Duke was being hanged. So, and then later that night, she would come get the Duke and they would run away. As the Duke was hanging there on his rope, he reflected on all that had happened and realized that he had not been very wise in his decisions, and determined that he would make a better effort in the future. Along about dusk, several carts came along the road beside the hanging Duke. These carts were filled with worn-out shoes, and an old man sat sitting atop them, laughing. He jumped down off the carts when they got to the Duke and said, "Ha! You see what happens? I've worn out all these many shoes doing your bidding these many months. But no more. You gave them up," and he waved the piece of paper in front of him. But he did not know that the Duke was not really dead. And so as he waved the piece of paper in front of the Duke hanging in there, the Duke snatched the piece of paper out of his hand and said, "Lassen my lad." And the man had to say, "What does my master want?" And the Duke said, "Restore everything that I had before, and cut me down from here. And when the princess is on her own, bring her to me." And so everything happened as he had prescribed. When the king woke up the next day, he was astounded. And when he went to investigate, he said, the Duke greeted him jovially. And the king, confused, asked, "But did I not try to hang you yesterday?" And the Duke says, "Oh, what is a hanging about? How could you hang me if I'm here?" The king, very confused, but happy all the same because everything was turning out fine, accepted and did not pry too much more into the issue. And as time went by, it showed that the Duke had learned his lesson. Adversity had taught him to be wise. He began to attend to things himself instead of asking Lasse to do them, until it was Lasse asked him one day, "You have no more need for me. I have hardly done anything for you in years." But the Duke said, "Yes, I know, but I cannot let you go because if I do, all these things will disappear." But Lasse said, "I have no fear from you, but what if someone else gets that piece of paper?" So they agreed to bury that piece of paper in a locked box, deep beneath the earth with a large stone on top of it. And so the Duke did as they agreed. And the Duke lived happily with the princess. They had children, and the Duke inherited the kingdom from the king and became a great ruler. As to that little box with that scrap of paper that was buried, many are still digging and searching for it today.